I don't know, 15 seconds.
Great.
And there we are. Hi, everyone. It's Sarithkin from Montier. I'm here with the Murder of Dukes interview with Duke Tom from Northshield. I'm not even going to try your last name because I think I'm going to butcher it. But 1010 Abluum. Bulum.
Pretty close. Close
okay,
enough.
I did try. Yeah. Okay.
There's at least 3 kingdoms of people that just call me Tintin, so that's fine.
Well, I actually your name is really cool. It reminds me of like a cartoon character or something.
There is one.
Yeah. Is there really?
There is a cartoon character called Tintin. If I remember correctly, it's a French cartoon.
Okay.
He goes on investigations and stuff. It's 1940s era, I think.
Cool. Well, I'm really excited to talk to you because you're from one of the kingdoms that I haven't talked to very many people from. I think you're only number 2. So I'm excited that way. And I really appreciate you taking the time and agreeing to talk to me. I know that we don't know each other at all, and I appreciate that. But you've seen I think you've seen a couple of these. I always start with your origin story. So if you want to tell us where, when, how you found the SDA, that would be great.
Sure. Also, thanks for having me on. And I really appreciate what you're doing with this across, every kingdom. You get to see so many interesting things, and this is uniquely entertaining to me.
Oh, well, cool. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Yeah, they're great. And you do a good job interviewing too. So
thanks.
Congrats on that. So for me, I started like I think a lot of people from our age. I started in about 92, and I saw fighting at my college, was enthralled with it immediately because you got to hit people with sticks while wearing cool armor, and nobody seemed to complain. So that seemed like a bonus. But starting in West Michigan, at that time at least, had some special challenges because there weren't very many people fighting at that point. Really large barony, not very many heavy fighters. And that was a couple years before Duke Morgan moved into the area. The only people who were active at that point fighting in Grand Rapids anyway were me, my roommate, who started the same time I did, and Garth of the Craigs, who was kind of the local group marshal veteran guy. But he hadn't been fighting heavily for years. He'd mostly been doing armoring. So he taught us as best we could and eventually dragged us off to Lansing, where we learned a lot more because that group was quite large. And that was Northwoods out of Midrum. And there we did get along pretty good. It was an hour drive each way, but we got to see a lot more people. They had a bunch of knights. I ended up learning how to fight side mount sword and shield for the first couple of years, which I'm not sure how much you're familiar with me, but I do the one true weapon, which is behind me in the corner there, which is polearm. I only really ever did sword and shield for the first couple of years. And being a lefty, I had the standard lefty cheats. And in those days, side mount rounds still kind of worked. So
did you know from the beginning that you would rather fight with a spear?
Nope. No. I had no clue, actually. When I first started, I was just happy to get armor. I was borrowing stuff that barely fit or would bite you every time you wore it. And so we tried to make some. We tried to, I made elbow cups and a chest plate, but I had to find legs. I had to borrow a helmet for a while and then get one of my own eventually. And that was the main struggle for the first couple of years, was just getting the kit together and then getting to practice with any regularity. So, but it was worth it. I mean, my last name means ringing bells, in case you're wondering why it's weird. Part of the reason for that is I was struggling to find a name. Tom obviously works. I mean, it's in the Bible, so it's going to be an easy one to document. So I went with my real name, which is Tom, but then the last name was a struggle. So we went with Tintinabulum because when I first started out, I was a lefty in a practice that had 6 other lefties already. So every right-hander knew how to fight them. I didn't leave a practice with hearing intact for months.
Nice.
My left hip and my left ear were pretty much deaf by the time I left to practice every week. So they just decided my helmet rang really nicely, so she just called me Tom the Bell, and I jazzed it up a little bit.
Well, your name makes me want to make a nursery rhyme or a limerick. So
yeah, there is a song that one of my squires wrote called Tom Tintinabulum's Tiger Petting Pole.
Oh.
If you search for it on YouTube, you'll find it. That was an attempt on my part to try to force one of my squires who's very artistically inclined to make a song because he's a bard and he took some offense to being told to do it. So he thought he'd come up with a funny song that was at my expense somewhat. Trick was on him. I didn't care. I sent him everywhere, including East Realm Royal, to sing it at Pinzig. So he got to write his song up and sing it to people, and it was pretty funny. It's actually pretty good. But yeah, so that was fun with that. But so otherwise, I went through, learned Sword and Shield to start. The day I authorized, and at the time I lived in Craig, which is West Michigan. So, and Baron Fum, who was one of the last Barons for life that still lived over there at that point, he was having his champions thing that day. And so I authorized. The rest of the barony kind of looked at the championship as kind of a funny, attaboy prize or something like that. So they weren't really trying really hard. I didn't know any better. So I tried really hard. So I ended up winning the tournament, which I was super happy with, not knowing that nobody else really wanted it. And then the Baron made me his champion. So the day I authorized, I became baronial champion of a barony that thought it was kind of a joke, which was kind of funny, but I didn't know any better. I was pretty happy with it.
Well, that's pretty unique to win a tournament the same day you authorize. Did the champion come with the duties? Did you have to stand court for your Baron?
Sort of. Fum, I don't think would be unfair to say, was a little strange. He was kind of an odder guy. Nice, real fun dude, but he was odd. And he was kind of at the end of his time. He was getting ready to move out of the kingdom, and so there was a transition that happened partway through. But mostly what I ended up doing was whenever there was any reason to be champion, like at courts, I would show up if you wanted me to. And I would also be out with the troops for the barony at the Baronial Border War, which was the Northwoods Craig Baronial War every year, where we got thumped pretty hard, usually by Bronis and his guys.
Well, good company. You get Brownus thumps a lot of people. So
yes, he has hit me many, many times.
So did becoming champion sort of open some doors for you with like mentorships or meeting people or
not especially.
Okay.
I think part of it was because it wasn't looked at as being super serious for that particular barony at that time. It was a little different. It didn't hurt any, but I ended up catching on with the folks in Northwoods more, mostly because there was more of them, and that's where we were going anyway. So for the first few years, it was lived in Craig, traveled to Northwoods for practice for the most part, and we would all carpool over and learn something for the day kind of thing and come home and lick all our bruises for the week and go back next week. And there were a few people there that I worked with. The first person who was actually from, you're in Nantier, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So he was from your neck of the woods at the time. His name was Rye Schuyler.
Oh.
And it's been a long time, so I'd be surprised if many people knew him at this point. But he was an unbelt, but he fought polearm and two-stick. And he looked like a dog chew toy. He had leather armor, and it wasn't very pretty, but it was very effective. And he was quite a good fighter. And I liked him. We were good friends. So I became his man-at-arms, along with my roommate also did. So for a number of years, that's where I was at for that, was sword and shield guy for a polearm guy as man-at-arms. He eventually kind of left the SCA, as people do. And there were, group politics and burnout and all that kind of stuff. But so I ended up eventually becoming a squire to Sir Philippe out of the Midram. And Philippe's a great guy. He has the best ability to snark garb that I've ever seen. And he is kind of a generalist 14th century Laurel, but he can lay down the snark, and it's always pretty funny. But he can fight quite well too. He was an amazing spearman and a very, very good sword and shieldman. So
is he who you learned your love of spear from?
In part. I mean, Rye was definitely part of that. Bronis was part of that. He was always really great with spear. Rombalder. I mean, it would be easier to find the people I didn't find inspirational, especially in the later years. I was very lucky that my group at the time, which was Argus in Midrealm at the point, was just filled with people that kind of became spear gods. And I'm not bad with it even now. And I would say that I would probably be, I don't know, maybe fifth out of that group of people. And I can hold my own pretty much anywhere with spear, but they were just really good. And it made it easy to want to live up to that because they were so good. It kind of pushed you on to be better.
Definitely. It always helps to have people that are dominating to make a weapon system look attractive.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And they're always different. Like I've always been a fan of take the bits that work, integrate them as best you can, and leave the stuff that doesn't, because not everything works for every person, right? And it can be tricky to teach people your style and then only give them the one thing they like. But if you just give them the idea of, well, here's what I do, take the things that work, don't worry about the rest if you can't get it to work. So I took things like some of Bronis's things, like the fighting inside of a block, like a 3-foot square. It teaches you not to leave your line mates, not to leave the openings and run everywhere or lunge out really far and screw over your people on your sides. So that I've always kept. That's always worked really well in my head. Some of the things with targeting, following weapons, teamwork, I got from my own people, and that was super useful for them. And you always had a person that was better than you to push you, which helps.
did you come to that conclusion, like, use what's helpful and disregard what doesn't work by yourself? Because I think a lot of people, at least like unbelted people, get very confused when they ask for feedback and they get conflicting feedback.
Yep.
And it's hard for them to sort through it. So how did you do that?
So I don't recall there being an aha moment, no eureka moment exactly. It's kind of a combination of things. All of us learn some tweak to our fighting or some aspect to our offense or defense that is sort of unique to us by our experiences. Some of us have the self-awareness to go back, break it down, go, I'm doing this and this and this to throw it. And that's why I get this angle, or because I do these kind of things, I can get this shot to work. And others of us have to have help. In my case, for a couple of things I came up with, I needed people to look at it. One of the best things that's ever happened for me was Braunus trying to figure out my helicopter shot before anybody knew what it was. And I didn't know what it was. I knew how to do it. I could work it. I didn't know how to teach it. And he watched me for a while fight one of the good unbelts at their practice. And he and Rambalder broke it down and showed me basically step by step what I was doing, which became kind of an aha, but it wasn't from me directly. And to tie that into what you're saying on the take the bits that work, that first time I can remember that is I desperately wanted to learn, like everybody did, how do I do what Braunus does?
Right.
Outside the mental stuff, which is a whole nother area, but just the physical things. How do I do what he's doing? And you go to a practice or you go to one of his training instructors, and it's like, I'm not sure I can do everything he's doing. Like just some of the physical things were not quite right, but it became I'm just going to take everything I can. Anything that I can make work, I'm going to do the best I can to make it work and see how that goes. And that kind of became, in my mind, take the things that work, leave the things that don't, and try to integrate. And I try to tell people in my classes, because I know some of the things I do at polearm are weird. Not a lot of people do them. It's not easy to absorb it in a 1-hour class. If you don't live near me, it's kind of hard for me to teach a lot of it. And so take the bits that work, leave the parts that don't. Maybe it'll help at least a little bit. And so I've been trying to push that.
So you have to tell me what a helicopter shot is, because I've never heard that term before, ever.
Have you ever seen a polearm throw a flat snap?
Yes.
It's basically that.
Okay.
There's more to it in the setup, in the footwork, in moving around the person, triggering them properly, getting them to do the things they want, whether they realize it or not. But the actual movement is basically like if you're going to throw a flat snap, it's a polearm shot where you're basically coming around.
Okay.
It takes a bit to set it up, but once you get it, it's pretty effective.
Cool. So how did you hook up with Philippe?
So he was one of the younger knights when I first started. He wasn't a knight yet. He was just a squire to Duke Tadashi. He was one of the older knights in the mid-realm. He would be contemporary to Eliyahu for time frame, and Dog. Not that I think they were.
Eliyahu is like the most regal-looking person I think I've ever seen.
It's more than just a look. He just is.
Okay.
You could just simply change that to he is the most regal person, and that would probably be pretty accurate.
All right.
If you just look at like his accomplishments, the things he's done for the society, the efforts he puts in, the way he carries himself, I mean, he is definitely an inspiration on how to be a regal individual inside the society and how to live a good knightly life. I think he would be a fine example for anybody, including myself.
Cool.
So his squire, Sigrid, is my queen when we reigned.
Oh, cool.
So,
That's really cool.
I had that extra bonus of getting to meet him and talk to him a little more.
So
Quite helpful.
I think I totally sidetracked you from Philippe, but
Oh, that's okay. I do that to myself too. I like to tangents are kind of my thing. So Philippe was a sword and shield guy, but he was an excellent spearman, just a fantastic spearman. And Tadashi, his knight wasn't super active, but Duke Felix, who you've also had, who's His Majesty Felix right now, he picked up Philippe kind of like his guy, but not in official name. But effectively, he was doing a lot of the training and the pushing and getting him going. Once he got knighted, Philippe approached me about being his squire because Rye had pretty much gone away at that point. And to be honest, that was kind of hard. I don't take commitments lightly, so giving Rye his stuff back because he wasn't doing it was hard, but it was a good choice. And Philippe and I could fight similar. It wasn't your typical I'm a brand new squire and the knight's way up here. It was much closer on the prowess side. He was still better, but I was closer than most squires would probably be. But I honestly needed someone like him to come through and kind of mold my personality a bit. I was very much the show up, fight, leave. I just wanted to crush people. I didn't care so much about the rest of it. I just wanted to win and I wanted to hit people. And he helped me see how the SCA can be when it's more than just show up, fight, and leave.
so how did that work for you? Because I think that's true for a lot of people that sort of fall in love with fighting and they don't have this inherent love for the historical.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you fall in love with the other parts?
Probably the first thing that really drove it home for me, because there were little things here and there that you see them in isolation and they make you like, wow, that's really cool, and it inspires you. You might see a cool movie, you might see someone do something really chivalric at an event, but they don't last. They tend to be like a sugary candy, right? It's great for a moment and it's gone and you forget. But when you get something that's fulfilling, something you worked on that builds a connection, then that tends to pull you in more. And in the case for me, Philippe getting me a discount coupon for a pair of arms, which I still have and use, from Historic Enterprises for 14th century encased arms that were spring steel. It was a discount, like a $50, I think, or something, and I ended up purchasing the rest, obviously. But then that required, not only did I have nicer armor, but now I needed something to attach it to. So then he gave me a pattern for how to make a jupon, but I had to make it. I had never sewn a thing in my life. So I had to buy fabric. I had to get sewing materials, a sewing machine. And it took a lot of effort and it scared me more than going out and fighting some super duke at the time, because I was so afraid I was going to screw it up. And it was just going to be this abomination with one arm up to here and the other one 6 inches too long. And so I spent 25 hours, working hours on that thing.
Wow.
I can do them now in like 4. But at the time, I was just everything, every little bit of minutia, and learning how they work, learning some history behind them, kind of helped start to build that. And then, of course, after you get one, it's like a drug. You want more. So had to make a hood, had to work on trying to come up with chausses and St. Louis shirts and all that stuff. And that helped build that area. And then that became, well, build nicer garb. And then the nicer garb is, well, maybe go do other things at the event besides leave, like court. Then you get to see all the majesty of that and start to understand how that affects the society. And then that builds an appreciation elsewhere. And it snowballed for me, at least.
I love that he did that for you, sort of. I know it wasn't like a quest, but it sort of is,
Mm-hmm.
where you learn how to develop your other skills so that you're a more well-rounded person, and that makes your fighting kit better.
Mm-hmm.
That's super cool. Because I really do think that's one of the ways that you start investing in the SCA, and your eyes sort of get opened to all the other cool things there are besides fighting, although fighting is the coolest.
Yep.
No offense.
No, I totally get you there.
Yeah.
Felix
But
also had a large part of that too. I don't want to cut Felix out there. Duke Felix at the time too was a good inspiration for that, because he looked so amazing as well.
he does.
So, and he was a good pushing factor. Having talked to him, you know how he is. He gets on a thing and he just goes. There's the
He's
hand
so
gestures
passionate.
and everything.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's so passionate. And it's so cool to have people like that to look up to, that are passionate and well-rounded, because they lead by example, right? And they inspire by example. And I always think it's better to inspire people to reach for those kinds of things than to shame them into it.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's cool. Do you do the same thing with your squires? To
I try.
Okay.
I'm not as accomplished at that as either Philippe or Felix in that regard. The I've tried to give my squires things to do that I think will help them or inspire them. The the tricky part for me is most of my squires are far more involved with the arts and sciences than I am, and so much better. A couple of them, I have one master's of my current squires. One has a master's to a couple undergrads. Another one has a PhD and a master's. Um, a few others have at least undergrads and have gone on to work on their masters, and we'll have that soon. So they're highly accomplished, driven people, and it doesn't take much to get them to go on to something. The converse side of that is, of course, since they were going for these upper level degrees, they couldn't spend as much time practicing. So they're great in service. They're great with the arts. They're wonderful human beings who strive to be knightly, which I greatly appreciate, because that's a major requirement for me. Is you don't have to be a knight, but you have to strive to be knightly. And I believe if they had the time, or if they have the time go forward, they could all be knights. But it would take concerted effort, which of course is the trick of it, right?
Right.
So, but so yeah, the trick for me is trying to push them to the field,
Yeah,
which is a little
I can
different.
relate to that, because both of my squires are really well-rounded people. I'll never have to teach them how to be a peer, neither one of them. Um, it's all about the fighting. But when people are well-rounded like that, it's harder to get them to focus enough on the fighting to
Yep.
take them up to where they need to be,
Yep.
which isn't a horrible problem.
No, I mean, ideally, I understand, and I'm sure you do, and everyone else that tonight does as well, is that not everybody that you pick up as a dependent is going to achieve peerage. And that can't be the be all end all, because then what happens when people don't? They aren't failures. They
No,
just didn't make that particular pinnacle. They can still be great additions to society. They can be pivotal to their areas. Being a peer is not the be all end all. So having incredibly well-rounded, involved, dedicated people who strive to be knightly, to me, is a win. So I feel very lucky for the squires I have. There's not a one of them I would trade in.
that's
Maybe a couple that graduated being knights, but that's a different problem.
okay. So tell me about your path to knighthood. Like, you were a really focused fighter. What kind of training did you do?
So for me, the interesting thing is as soon as I got out of being a sword and shield guy and went into polearm, I had some affinity for it. So that was helpful. Um, Having Rye there was great. I'm not sure if you've heard of or met Michael Akuan. He was kind of a physical adept. He's a knight in the mid realm. He fought polearm, but he was pretty much good at everything. And a number of other people that could fight it well in the area. So I got lucky that I got to meet a lot of people that were pretty good at polearm off the bat. And they mostly fought what I would consider these days SCA standard polearm. It's nothing super special by what you can do with it, but it's highly effective in melee. It's somewhat effective in tourney, but it doesn't generally have an inside game. Um, there are a few people in the mid realm that have that ability. Palomar, obviously, almost everybody knows of Palomar, but if you don't, Palomar was knighted at a pretty early age in the SCA. He was one of, if not the first, he might have been the first mid realm unbelt king, I think.
Oh, wow.
Um, and he could fight, no question. Really good at polearm. And he has a smash mouth style, which is basically an inside game with an outside game is extra. Um, but he predominantly, as I recall, and I'm sure people would correct me on this, but I believe he was mostly a range fighter that if you got near him, he had no problem coming after you. I'm kind of the reverse. I look forward to shields charging me because it gives me a lot of advantages, especially against people that aren't familiar with an inside fighting polearm. So, whereas the range is perfectly fine, you're going to give it to me, I'll take it. But I'm most happy fighting sword and shield, and I'm most happy fighting when they're in my pants, basically.
How did you figure that out for yourself?
Well, and that's the fun part. So it in the early years, obviously, like most things, you learn your basic shots. Once you get down to basic shots, you can throw them. You don't have to think about them. You can get to a no mind state sort of with them, and that's great. But you need to have a mental game, obviously, to make that go on. The problem I was running into is I wasn't finding a lot of people once I got to that point that were appreciably a lot better with the pole arm that existed at the time. There were some people that were figuring it out, but they were kind of the same spot I was. So I tried to think of what could I do that'd be different, and what's my weakness here. If I want to fight this from one hand grip or one hand stance, really, it's not really a grip. It's I fight left hand back pretty much exclusively. Now you change from short, medium, and long grip, but it's left hand back mostly because you can stab around shields easier that way, since almost everybody's right-handed. Just simpler. So I didn't really have an issue there, but it's like, what happens when people get close? How do I beat these people? Because it's hard to deal with them in close. So my practice had a patch of earth that was about maybe a 5-foot dirt area with grass all around it. And I basically at practice would spend about half of the practice doing I'm going to stand in this dirt. And if you can get me out of it, then you win. If I take more than one step out of it, you win. If I try to run away, you win. And so I would let the sword and shields attack me from anywhere. They could run in, they could run through, they could try to push me out. I didn't care. But I spent the time just trying to do that. And it spent 6 months of getting my head handed to me. It was just basically brutal beatdown after brutal beatdown for months. But eventually I started seeing openings. So it's like, oh, if I block here and my hand's higher than their shield, it's a pivot point like a channel lock on an oar. And you just roll this up and you drop it over the shield top and it's right there. So if you go block, bang, bang. So you can do all of it just that fast and they're dead. You know, you can reach around the shield on the other side and stab them. You could take and roll over and pin their sword on it, reach further and backhand them. You know, there were things that started to show the more I did it. And some of the folks I worked with there started to learn and adapt also. And that was good because it kept pushing me to be better. But fighting in that limited space was probably the single biggest thing. And then being obstinate enough not to stop it, even when the beatings kept happening. So
yeah, I mean, I think it takes a special kind of dedication and I guess dedication is the right word, to say, this is what I'm working on. I'm going to do it. I don't care that I'm losing and getting, my head handed to me over and over and over. Cause that's hard. That's hard to get your ass handed to you for 6 months.
It's not fun.
No.
But yeah, like you said, the biggest trick, the thing that caused me the most doubt was not knowing what was going to be at the end. Since I didn't know anybody that had done anything like this, I hadn't heard of Avalock yet. And I wish YouTube had existed when he was more active, because I desperately want to know what he did, and what probably still does for that matter. I'd love to see his style. But at the time, what I had to see was pretty basic, and they're effective with it, but it wasn't particularly different. And it just caused me to think there's got to be other ways, right? Like Sword and Shield, to its benefit or demise, depending how you look at it, has had so many people working on it for such a long period of time that if you can find some new technique under the sun, I'd be shocked. Yeah. They've had people beat that to death, which allows you to refine it to a very, very sharp edge. Polearm, not so much. Can you think more than maybe 10 people across the SCA that fight predominantly polearm that are any good?
No.
I mean, right. But I could name 5 times that many shieldmen and probably keep going.
Right.
And part of that is true for the other weapons too. We tend to focus heavily, and it's not horrible. It's just it doesn't do us a lot of favors across the board on Sword and Shield. We don't have a lot of people focusing the other weapon styles, so you end up having to develop a lot of your own stuff, and some of that might not bear fruit. And so that discourages people from trying, because they don't want to waste 6 months and a bunch of bruises not knowing if there's going to be any gain.
Right.
And so, yeah, bit of a leap of faith, and partly I'm just super stubborn. So,
well, stubborn is a good trait for success.
Sometimes.
So.
It has its other areas, because I know you like to talk about reigns in this interview too. that's where you'll get to see where stubborn wasn't as useful.
Oh, okay. Well, we will explore that in a little bit. Did you get knighted as a primarily a polearm fighter?
Mhm.
Okay.
I think pretty much you'd have to ask people from the time, to be honest. I actively avoided finding out information about what knights liked what I did and which ones didn't. I had an approach. You've heard of TOCs, right? Tournaments of Chivalry.
Yes.
All right. So for us, one of the best things Braunus ever did was setting that up and getting away from the invite crown system for the mid realm. Because I mean, you just couldn't turn it down. I mean, if you got invited, how do you turn it down? Because you're shooting yourself in the foot if you don't go, and if you do go and it doesn't go well, that's not great. But if you do win, then you're reigning, and that's a job, and that's an important job. So it was really a no-win. So he did mid realm a huge favor, just a huge favor by getting that out of there. And but the TOCs were fantastic because you show up on a day where you know, although you're going to fight a bunch of tired knights, you want to make an impression. And for me, after a little while, people knew I could fight polearm. And then the question that I got back from people was, well, but what else can you do? So I would take out a buckler and fight sword and buckler. Because if I could hit anybody at that thing with sword and buckler, especially when they know I'm not a sword and shield guy, I figured that would answer the question for them. And then I would fight them with polearm part of the day too. And when I'd win, I always made sure to go and ask. And partly this was an honest question, and partly was to try to make a difference enough that people would think about me. Was what could I do better, especially for the people that I beat and beat handily? Was what could I have done better? What could I, how could I have done something differently to be more effective from your point of view? And the answer I wanted was nothing. You beat my ass. That was the perfect answer because I knew they're going to remember it. And then I had that spot in that rental free apartment that I wanted. So if they had honest answers, though, I was all about that too, because you're still there to learn.
Right.
And you want to show off a little bit, you want to do well, but you definitely want to take advantage of that unique learning opportunity. So, yeah, I've always been a fan of that. Even now, I mean, if someone beats me good, I want to know what they did.
Right.
You know, I spend days sometimes just thinking about losses because I want to replay every angle and figure out. I haven't been able to fight for 2.5 years. I have a heart condition that they have to chop me open to fix, and there hasn't been a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about fighting. Angles, footwork, what could I do differently? You know, that fight I lost 3 years ago to TOC, how could I have won that? You know, what did they do? What could you tell them to do better if there was something they could do better? And yeah, it dominates my thoughts quite a bit.
Are you going to come back? Is that in the cards or okay?
Well, assuming when they cut me open they don't flub it and like kill me, yeah.
Because I know
Yeah.
it's hard to stay engaged sometimes when fighting doesn't become an option.
It would be, but again, that stubborn streak kind of kicks in. To say I have a burning desire to put on my gear and hit people would be an understatement. Um, if I could go fight right now, I would. Um, we've had a couple of before things got super bad around everywhere. We had a couple of very informal, like our pod of people got together for a distanced 4th of July, and we had a few people come out to fight a little bit. And I did boffer pull on, and I could still do. I'm rusty, but I could still move most of the things I normally do. The movements were there, the angles were there, the instincts were still there. So that made me feel pretty good, even
Yeah.
if all I did was like 3 minutes of messing around with a foam toy.
So I was gonna ask because where I'm from in Ontario, like it's um very rare that somebody gets considered for knighthood if they aren't a very good sword and shieldman. If their weapon form is something else. Is that true also in the mid realm or in Northshield now? That
Well, it's been 14, yeah, 14 years since I moved from mid-realm, so things could have changed. I keep in touch, but I'm not there. They've generally had an okay number of people, in my opinion, get elevated for weapons besides sword and shield. They don't discourage it. You know, they definitely lean more sword and shield, like pretty much every place does, but they don't discourage people from it. they don't actively go up and say, you're never going anywhere fighting that style. You know, they don't do things like that, which are, in my opinion, a huge disservice. I know some people do it on the thought that they're trying to save people from wasting their time. What they're really doing is they're bullying people into one weapon type, and it stifles. And to be honest, you're making it easier for people like me to show up in your kingdom and beat you. Because when I travel to places that predominantly only have sword and shields, you've never seen anyone that fights like me, and it makes my life so much easier. And it's evident why, because you don't fight any polearms. And when you don't, you become honestly susceptible to tricks that me and other people that do fight a lot of sword and shields do to beat you guys. It doesn't do you any service. And if you have someone that's passionate about learning another weapon, why would you want to take that away from them?
All right.
So
I think it's important to, if somebody's really passionate about a different weapons form, to let them know that the path may be harder for them in some ways. But, you know, definitely if that's what they want to do, they should do it.
Yep.
They should just know that, you know, it might take longer. It might be more painful.
Yeah, it's definitely not going to be easier by and large. All the weapons outside of sword and shield are generally more difficult to use against sword and shield in a limited list. Some of them, like Bastard Sword, that's probably the single hardest one. I mean, you want to go and be a primary Bastard Sword fighter and get knighted, you've got maybe the hardest road to knighthood of anyone. It's gimped against great weapons. It's gimped against sword and shield. The rules don't work in its favor. That is a tricky weapon style to get really good at.
Yet there's still people that are very good at it, like Mark de Arundel. So
Yep, there are.
Yeah.
And if I'm sure if you asked them, they would tell you, and you probably have,
I have.
but the that they had to struggle to get there. They had to put the time, the effort. They had to do an awful lot to get where they are, and that's just the nature of it.
Very focused people. It's stubborn too. So I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure I can send you some links to Avalok fighting Glaive back in the day. So I will put that on my to-do list because the ones back in the day aren't labeled very well, and it would be very hard for you to find them without knowing what you're looking for. So,
yeah, YouTube searches have not been particularly eventful.
So I will do that for you because I'm pretty sure in my head I know where a couple are. Because he still, I mean, he doesn't obviously play in the SCA anymore up here, but he's still a great glaive fighter. And not a bad sword and shieldman. So
yep, I've seen a little of his stuff from Battle of Nations, and he can move.
Yeah,
it's pretty impressive. But the non-fighting stuff kept off to the side, just talking about his fighting. Very impressive resume.
Yeah,
and the people I know that have seen him fight speak glowingly of his ability.
So Sean, Duke Sean, made a comment that you are one of the best pole arm teachers or trainers in the sport. Is teaching and training like another love for you? Do you get fulfillment from it?
So I do not feel I'm that good. He is being incredibly kind. I would say, and so here's two parts to that. He could be right, and that's a shame. Because if I am, there needs to be better people. And the reason I say that is because I feel like, and like most people, you know your own flaws. If you're being true to yourself anyway, you know your own flaws. And every time I teach a class, I'm like, I didn't cover that. And I forgot this basic thing. And there's these 5 other things they have to do to make this work. And even when I have class notes, sometimes I just can't get it all into an hour or 2 hours, or even an event worth of classes, just can't distill enough of it to make it work. And I know people get some benefit out of them, and especially at wars where I can fight with them a little bit, I can give them a nugget or two that makes it work. But I know how much more there's there, and I feel bad that I'm not giving them enough to continue, because there's no good way to say, and then you go do this forever. It's I give them the spacing thing, the limited spacing. I try to get footwork, handwork, the 2 attack styles, and 1 or 2 tricks, and that's about all I've got time for in an hour, and that's horribly inadequate.
Well, I was gonna say, one, Sean is not gratuitous with his compliments, so I'm sure that you are underselling yourself. And 2, it is impossible to fit everything into a class that you need to. And it definitely is impossible for the students to be able to synthesize it all. So I think one or two, like, or three things that you can hit them with that they can remember or actually get and have a light bulb moment is more than sufficient for a
Yep.
class. But
Yep.
anyway.
I do best with people that have learned SCA basic polearm. They have an understanding, but they're missing hand grip changes, weight distribution, footwork. If those things are the things they're missing mostly, that's probably the easiest person to increase quickest, because then I can give them a couple things to work and they can do it. And they don't glass over like when you tell people the long litany of things and they just so and
I
that's
loved your or metaphor, because that when somebody told me that, like, about the pivot points, I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense, and I could actually visualize it. So
mhm.
I love that.
Yep. And a pole arm and an oar share a lot of characteristics. Except you're hitting the water, I suppose, instead of a person. But yeah.
So let's talk about your knighting. Was it a surprise? Did you get a vigil?
So yes, and it was interesting to me in a lot of ways. So like you hear of most people, I thought I was 6 months, a year at best before I was going to get put on vigil. I knew I was doing well. I knew I was proceeding in a reasonable course. I had no idea where I was at exactly. And there were so many other people that were doing so well, especially of the unbelts I knew. I'm like, oh, this guy's great. That guy's great. So you do that thing where you put yourself in order, like, well, okay, so Joe Blow over here got knighted yesterday. So that probably means these 4 or 5 people. And then you do the math in your head and you're like, well, reigns tend to do no more than 4 or 5 in the mid realm a year. And they tend to be bunched around Pinzig and then sometime in the winter and sometimes during the summer, but they break them up a bit. So you think to yourself, where do I fit in this? I'm like, well, and then you have to have a reign that actually likes you well enough and thinks you're good enough. So you might be okay with the order. You might be okay with your abilities, but the crown doesn't like you. So you're not going to get touched in that reign. And that's just the nature of it, right? Crowns have their opinions and they get to pick the people. So it's how it goes. So I kind of figured I was probably a couple years off, depending on who won crown and how I did in the interim. So at the Pinzig where I got put on vigil, they put a lot of other people on vigil the same day in mid-realm camp. And so I'm just kind of watching, and one of my friends, Redwald, got put on vigil, and he was drinking a beer and spit it all over the back of my knight's wife in surprise, which was odd and shocking, but very Redwald. And so he got put on vigil, and then I got tasked with going and finding Dirk out of Ann Arbor, and because he was getting put on vigil, so I ran over to his camp and got him. He came back, he got put on vigil, and then they did one more, and that was me, and it surprised the heck out of me. And yeah, so one of my very best friend at the time was in the camp too, is one of the retainers, and did the loud eep thing, which was kind of like, what happened there, because you don't really. I can't say this for everybody. For me, I didn't really hear my name. Like, it kind of registered that they said my name, but it kind of did the. Were they talking about something else? Did they move to other business? Did I get like a fighting award or something? It didn't really register the whole being put in vigil thing right away. And so that was kind of a surprise. And in mid-realm camp at Pinzig was pretty awesome.
Nice.
So can't lie, that was cool.
Did you get knighted later at Pinzig or at a different event?
Nope, my wife doesn't play SCA really, but I never asked, but I'm assuming they must have told her what their plans were so that she could be involved. So there was an event called Havoc in Hastings in West Michigan. That's a couple 3 weeks after Pinzig usually. Maybe first week in September. Yeah, it's more than a couple weeks. It's about a month. So they did the elevation there, and I'd gone to that event a number of years. And my wife would take the dogs. We had Newfoundlands, so they would go hang out on the beach, and the dogs would bark at the jet skis and try to chase them, which is humorous for giant slow swimming dog chasing jet skis. But so we went to that every year just about, and so that's where I got put on vigil. They did it. I wanted a 14th century vigil because I do 14th century in general, Viking garb notwithstanding. But so I had my tent that they'd set up where they kind of, instead of doing normal rectangle, they did an internal wall. So I sat in there with stool, ice water, braised chausses, and that's it. So I had a white wall surrounding me. It's still pretty warm in Michigan in September, so that was warm. They did puppet theater for me, which is nice. They moved the fighting right up to the ropes just outside my tent. So I could kind of see people fighting and I could hear the fighting, but I never actually saw any of it. So that was a trial in of itself. And that was intentional. My night was very good at that. And then on the other wall, they put all the food. And I'm pretty much a carnivore. So the very nice people I know made all these wonderful meat dishes that I could smell through the wall. Never saw any of it. Never tasted any of it. Not one tiny morsel. It was all gone by the time they brought me out for the elevation. And then they just paraded people in who would occasionally bring me new buckets of ice water, basically, for my drink. And so I really appreciated that. It was focusing. It was, trying to cut out the extra distractions and understand why I'm there and listen to people's advice. I did get advice from people, obviously, all throughout Pinzig and directly, but the vigil day itself was very important to me. Many bits of that are still etched actively in my memory. So,
what was your favorite piece of regalia that you got at your knighting?
My belt.
Yeah. Does it have a story?
Kind of. So I might get a touch emotional with this part because it kind of has extra meaning. So I got my belt from friends of mine in the household. It had metal bells on it and everything. And like is standard, my wife got to put it on me, which is great. But my best friend at the time, and would still be if she was still alive, was Phelan Breck, Baroness Phelan Breck. And I would not have gotten knighted without her. She was a really good person. Sorry, it's been 3 years and I still have trouble. She helped me learn how to keep some of my more angry, outbursty, like when you get mad at fighting or frustrated, you don't want to yell. You don't want to scream at people. You certainly don't want to go crazy on the field. And that's always been something I had to learn to keep in check. I still have problems like if I break a finger or someone hurts me significantly, I tend to snap to anger and I don't like it, but it's hard to control. It's rare. But the more casual, just being super mad because whatever, she was really good at trying to pull that in and really helped me with a lot of the off the field things and was my consort inspiration for the 2 mid-realm crowns I fought in, and also just a wonderful human being. So I wouldn't have gotten it without her. I don't have that belt anymore because I gave it to her mother at her funeral. And I haven't been able to replace it yet. I use my fighting belt as my everything belt now. So kind of hard, but it is what it is. So you just have to live with it, move on.
It's great when people touch your lives that way, and it's also very painful when they leave us. But
yeah, that is definitely true. So not to be a giant bummer on it, but that's a meaningful piece of regalia.
I've not to change the subject abruptly, but I find a lot of people that are stubborn are very, very dedicated, also are emotional, and it is hard to keep your emotion in check when you work so hard and you're invested, and and it's fighting is kind of an emotional thing anyway, right? So I totally get that. And I think that I talked to God, what was his name? A guy out of Palantir about it too. Because that is a hard thing to get under control. And without making you cry again, were there things that you did to sort of take some of the emotion out of your fight? Because I know that a lot of times you're just like, well, I'll say from experience, I'll be upset at myself, but it won't come out that way.
Yep.
And that's something that I've worked very, very hard on, because you don't want to inadvertently make your opponent feel bad. So
Yep.
yeah.
No, I totally understand that, and I share that problem. I tend to be super critical on myself. Um, I'll call shots off of other people when I know I threw them bad. But if it happened to be something like, so a pole arm, because it tends to be bang bang, you tend to like, you'll catch a shot, you'll throw the shot. So sometimes there have been confusion where I'll say, no, that wasn't a good on something that was, they hit me and I glanced off them and they're like, well, how could that possibly be? You clearly just got crushed. I'm like, no, no, no. I mean, my shot on you. I'm totally dead. But, but you can say it so frustratedly that it immediately kind of sets them on edge. Where if you're like, if you just go, no, they might question you. But when you're like, no, now, that was crap or whatever. I'm talking out loud when I should be using my inside voice.
Right.
And that's the thing I had to learn a lot more of, was how to stop exclaiming things out loud that really aren't germane to what's going on.
Right.
Um, and that still can be a challenge on occasion. Like if you're just being lazy mentally that day or something, and you're just kind of, maybe even you're just screwing around and you're fighting a new person and you get, because they hit you. It's like, I just did something super stupid, but good shot.
Right.
It's like, well, it doesn't make them feel real great. Yeah, sure, they killed you. You accepted it. But if you say, well, you just did something stupid, it implies that they should never be able to hit you. And that's just not true. I mean, everybody can hit everybody sometimes. You're not going to block everything 100%. So it's not fair to them. And it's not really how we should do it. I do it occasionally. I've had to go back and apologize for like, nope, you're fine. That was me being an ass. Sorry. And that
We're human.
takes some.
Yeah. We're all human.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But,
Yep. Same thing with missing shots, right? There's not a fighter alive that hasn't missed a shot. And if you catch it while you're still there, you can fix it right away. Right. You can say, oh, nope, I missed that. I'm dead. Or you got the arm or whatever. You can fix it. If you don't catch it till later, or you're thinking about it, or you find that bruise, like maybe you didn't feel it. And then if you're like me, you wear a fair bit of metal. If you can bruise me in the chest, you hit me pretty damn hard. So if I find a bruise later, you might get an email from me going, that probably was fine. I don't know why I didn't feel it, but I've got this pretty obvious bruise through my 14 gauge, Globos press plate. So yeah. So it happens, but you try to minimize those.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to do though, is to own up to that. I'm always very impressed when people, even like years later, will be like, this has been eating at me and I need to whatever. So I think,
but it's the way we're supposed to do it.
Right. I mean, and I think, most people, the intent is good. And so if we could just give each other the benefit of the doubt more, I think we could, trust wouldn't be so hard.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yep. And the same thing applies not just with missing shots, but just to kind of go back on the when people lose their cool thing. A number of years ago, we were fighting at one of our local pod arms, and I was fighting a guy that's quite a good fighter, and the gauntlets at the time were not as nice as the Gretters I have now. So when I'm fighting, if I have the grip right, he threw a reverse blade shot that caught the inside of the fingertip and just blew it up. And that happens some, but it just, you got blood everywhere. The fingertip explodes. It hurts like a bugger. And I lost my cool and called him every name in the book, up one, downside the other. Exactly what you want to see a royal peer saying in the middle of a pod arm, right? Like no possible better picture, right? So I had to calm down from that, and it takes, if I get hurt, if you leave me alone for 10 or 15 seconds, I'll calm down. It'll subside. I get my head back together. That's fine. He felt so bad he hurt me. He was coming up to check on me and was poking me and like, are you fine? Are you fine? And that's when I snapped and yelled at him. It was super bad form on my part. And by the time I calmed down, gathered him up, gathered everyone at the event that was still there, which wasn't as many as people as I wished had been there. I wish everyone that had heard me could see it, because I'm like, he did nothing wrong. He threw a normal shot. I lost my cool and was a giant asshole. That's my problem. That is not his problem. I shouldn't have acted like that. And it's something I need to work on. And it's still, once in a while, I still lose my cool. I still get angry at things. And it's an ongoing project. Pretty much always.
Well, we're all a work in progress. So it never stops. So let's talk about going for crown and reigning. You reigned in Northshield twice, right?
Yep.
Okay. Um, were those crowns that you wanted to win? That, I mean, obviously you wanted to win, but that you were going for and you had planned for?
So I've fought in a total of 4 crowns ever.
Okay.
2 mid-realm crowns, 2 Northshield crowns. Um, I have a somewhat unpopular viewpoint on how crowns should be fought, and that you shouldn't even enter unless you intend to win. And if you intend to win, you need to make sure you can do the job. And I don't, and this is a personal view, and I get other people have other ones, and that's fine. But I don't hold to the go to crown to show off. Don't go there just to fight and look good. Don't go there to fight and throw it when you get too close because you don't really want to be king. You know, if you're going to put in for it, fight to win. Fight for your consort's honor and do what you're supposed to do and take on the task for the kingdom. For that in mind, I've only ever fought in 4. So the 2 mid-realm crowns, much larger crowns than Northshield. I did okay for a polearm in a mid-realm crown. I think I did fine. I was quarterfinals in both, if I remember correctly. I think I was just a shy off of semifinals on the one, but quarterfinals, which for 32 person list isn't too bad. Coming to Northshield, I had to wait a year when I moved. I was going to fight in the next one. That didn't end up happening because I busted my knee. And then it took a while to fix my knee. And once the knee got good, it was 2010. So about 4 years after I moved here. Fought in that one. It was a mixed weapons crown. You just had to bring your best kind of thing and tell people what you're doing. I fought the first 2 rounds sword and shield just for trying to make sure like the opponent would pick one and then the junior, senior, junior. So junior picks a weapon, senior picks a weapon. If there's a third round, junior picks the weapon. So he picked sword and shield. I won that fight. I picked sword and shield next to try to throw people off a little bit. Won that fight. And then did the same thing in the next round. And I'm like, okay, that should be enough to convince people so they won't feel completely 100% like I can't fight it, right? Because they've most of them had never seen me put a shield on my arm ever. So like, okay. And then talking to people a little bit around, they're like, I didn't know you were left-handed. They didn't care I could fight sword and shield at all. It didn't even matter. They're just like, oh, you're a lefty. We never knew because of the polearm thing. Like, all right, that's not what I wanted, but I'll take it. The finals for that fight was me versus my squire at the time, also a polearm guy, a very accomplished polearm guy, and he knew me better than anybody in the tournament. So that was tricky. And if he wasn't the honorable, wonderful human being he is, he would have won that crown. I had a leather camel, I still do, and it hangs down a bit out over my chest, but it's attached to the grill. So he threw a thrust that was pretty light. I didn't really feel it hit the body at all, but he caught the leather and it jiggled the face grill. So I assumed he'd hit me on the face grill. So I started to look to fall down. He came over and stopped me, saying, no, that wasn't your face. That was your chest. It just hit this and did that. He could have said nothing. It was the deciding fight. He would have been king. So currently, Duke Ingvar deserves all the credit for being a wonderful, upright person because nobody would have questioned him. I certainly wouldn't have. And that was wonderful. Now, on the reset, my brain autopiloted and I turned him into a Pez dispenser, which I feel a little bad about because you don't need to hit someone that hard in the face. But saw the opening and the arm just went and it was just way too hard. But it still counts. So, and he was fine, but it was just, yeah. The lady I fought for was Sigrid Delamere, and she is Duke Eli's squire. I believe she might still be. She wasn't during the reigns because that's kind of a weird. You can't really be a squire when you're a royal kind of thing. I don't recall if she re-upped with him after the last one or not, but I know she's still part of his household. I just don't know if it's squire. Anyhow, she's an excellent fighter, very nice lady. We get along pretty darn well, and she knows to tell me to shut up or hey, you're being an ass, and can get it through to my brain, which is someone I needed. I needed a strong person that could tell me, hey, you're being an ass, stop it. I didn't need anyone to feed into any of my worst thought processes. So that was super helpful. We made a pretty good team. And it was wonderful seeing her do the job as queen. She's a fantastic queen. She's organized. She's on the point. She really knows how to reach people and really engage them in a good way. I was arm candy. I'm okay with that. So, I could fight a bit and keep my mouth shut when I'm told to. And that's pretty much where a lot of it, I could do the occasional speech, but she really had it down and did a lot of work. Also, our staff was fantastic. I think people don't understand sometimes how much staff does to make a royal couple look good. I feel like they really get the short stick on that. And yeah, sometimes they'll get nice rewards at the end and all that, but it's really not indicative of how much work a lot of those people have put in that last year. Depending on your kingdom. Some obviously don't do full year total aspects, but
for retinue, it does a lot of work.
Yep.
Lot of work. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of energy.
Yep. And they put a lot of effort in and greatly appreciated. So any reign that runs well is because the staff is doing an awful lot of work. So usually when reigns go sideways is when the staff is done with the BS of whatever's going on and they can't do anymore. They're out of spoons.
Meet your staff well.
Yep, absolutely.
The
second reign was similar.
Go ahead.
It was the second one was a polearm, great weapon crown, which we have a lot of great weapons in our kingdom. Several knights that fight great weapon. To me, it never felt like a slam dunk. I know afterwards, several people are like, "Oh, your friend set that up, and it was totally for you." But it's like I kept looking at everybody like, "Oh, that guy's beat me here, here, and here, and this one's beat me with that weapon style," and so you had to still play it out. As it turns out, I only got touched a couple of times. One, I had to go back and look on video because I probably, like I was saying earlier, with the sometimes you miss things. Yeah. There was one where I was pretty sure I caught the block, but looking on video, you could see where Count Reese had touched my helmet. I didn't register it, but I still feel super bad about it because ideally, you never want anyone to touch you.
Right.
Or if you do, you at least want to say something. Right. I didn't even respond. So, but I just didn't notice it, but it still feel bad about it. You don't want to screw anyone over and something like that. That's just bad. Otherwise, I got touched once the rest of the way through. So, is what it is on that point. But it was kind of fun.
I've watched a couple of Northshield crowns on YouTube, and it seems like they're usually very deep on using different weapons all the time. Is that true?
Pretty accurate. Okay. I think it's a safe statement to say that there is not a kingdom in the SCA that has as diverse a set of weapons amongst our fighters as Northshield. We almost certainly have the deepest number of polearms that fight tourney of any kingdom. But by capita, obviously we're a tiny kingdom, so we might have 300 heavy fighters, but I'd say at least half of those are polearm authorized, and probably at least 30 of them can fight it pretty reasonably in a tourney. We've at one point, I think we had 7 polearm specific knights out of our 30.
That's a pretty high number.
Yep, and we've got 4 of us currently that I would say are really pretty darn high end for polearm, and 3 of us have unique styles, so which you won't find pretty much anywhere. One of them is very specific to that guy's body shape, so he's made a thing work for him because he's just a big boy. Okay. But the others have come up with really kind of interesting ways of making it work. You picked up one of our guys, Tagashi.
Oh, okay.
Sir Tagashi? I feel like I'm saying his name wrong. He does Portuguese armor, Japanese persona. Oh. He moved out to Antir to do, I think, yes. Underwater welding.
Yes, I fought him at Ursulmus. Yep. He green and yellow armor.
Could be. I honestly can't remember the color. Yeah. But if it's Portuguese and he's a kind of skinny guy, good thrust.
I don't know if I'd call him skinny, but yes,
that could have changed too.
Okay.
Oh, Brehan. You also have Brehan.
Oh, maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
So you picked up 2 of our polearm knights.
Okay.
Yeah, Brehan's really good. He's more muscly, bigger guy, not as fast. Tagashi was, and he just hasn't fought since he's been out there. I don't know, but he had one of the quickest thrusting games of anyone I've ever fought. Really hard to get past this point.
Well, I'll have to look him up when events start again.
Yeah, he's a fun fight. He can fight quite successfully against Sword and Shield, even though he's predominantly a thruster.
Cool.
But quick.
Yeah. So what was your favorite part about reigning?
Well, probably the single best thing with a reign, in my opinion, is being able to give awards to people and try to make their day. everybody, I think, gets told the same thing when you're elevated. And I think somewhat too when you win a crown, if you're not a peer, you can make someone's day with a word, but you can crush their day with a word too. So you have to be kind of careful. When you do something like even, and I know a lot of us can be jaded because we've been in for so long and oh, it's an AOA, whatever, and we'll sit through court and yay, you got your AOA, and we don't really pay attention. But for those people, that's the first thing they've gotten an attaboy in the society. And they're usually super geeked about the whole thing. They take it very seriously. So getting to see their reactions, and we tried really hard to personalize it. I don't have the greatest memory for remembering everything. So we had cheat sheets. So we'd make up a list of all the awards, their names with phonetic sayings of them, and a little blurb on why they're written in if we didn't already know them, which obviously you don't know everybody in your kingdom. Right. And you'd try to look at that before court. And then when people were going back after receiving an award, you'd take a quick glance on it because they're all looking at that person and clapping. You read the next one again, see which person's taking it, and then try to give them a nice personalized, you're really cool because, and here's your award because of it. And people light up on those, and you can just see them and their friends are also happy, and it really makes people in the SCA quite happy. I mean, if you win a tournament, people are happy for you, right? You'll get some clapping and yay, you did a good job. Does anybody really get affected by it? No, not really. And if you've won more than a few, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I won again. Okay. It's just not, it's a fleeting thing at best. And it's not the same as having effectively all your peers recognize your accomplishment and be happy for you. So yeah, the crown had to give it to you, but they only give you things that are written in. And if nobody writes in, you don't get the thing, right? So if a bunch of your friends are like, hey, this guy's great and he deserves this or that, or she made this awesome stuff and she deserves this or that award, they're all happy for him. So they get to share in that, and it tends to build community. And that's the thing I think that the current COVID thing is causing the biggest problem for. I know that Reigns are struggling. It's a hard time to be a royal. Sorry. But handing out awards now, although they will get recognized for things, and it's nice to get the recognition still, it loses a lot since you don't get the people in the crowd celebrating it. You don't have the people at the back of court coming to look at your award and saying that's really great. You don't have the scroll in your hand. You don't have your moment in front of the dais. And they're never going to get those, right? So anyone that got a higher level award or a peerage, that's it. You don't go to redos. They're not going to get their time in court or their vigil or whatever. And for the people, the AOAs, an awful lot of people in the society never go beyond AOA. So they're never going to get that moment in the sun kind of thing. And so I get there's a difficulty. You want to recognize people, but I feel like a lot of that's being lost, and that community building it's doing is lost as well.
What do you think a better way to keep people engaged would be other than trying to have court?
See, that's kind of a tricky one, right? If we had a system, which we currently don't because we're all volunteers, if we had something more of a system where people almost worked like in a guild, sort of, where you have, let's say you really are interested in cooking, and I'm sure some kingdoms probably have things like this, but there's no SCA wide that I'm aware of set up for any of these. Cooking, serving tends to be, for lack of a better term, a clique, right? The same people tend to work it over and over and over. So cleanup staff tend to be very commonly, marshals tend to be very commonly. If you're bringing people into these folds, having some type of structure besides just totally rando interaction would help not have to go through that initial hard moment of, hi, I'm brand new. I don't know any of you people. You're super intimidating. So please include me. I mean, that's a lot of put on a new person.
It is.
And not every group, even well-meaning groups, are open enough to call that person in just because they see them standing nearby. Or worse, sometimes we're overly zealous and we go through the 50,000 things, then they only need to know 2. So I would think some type of system that includes people without having to put it on the onus completely of the new person. Give them clear options and they can join. And then that's them still making the decision to join. But from there, there's some type of structure that they can fall into instead of the totally just rando, pick it up. Hopefully somebody that's good at this is there to tell you.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Well, we've been going a little over an hour, so unless there's something that we haven't talked about that you'd really like to talk about, we should look at your killing tool.
All right.
Okay. You're also a pelican. What's your service wonk?
Well, for me, it's mostly just get stuff done. I've always been kind of on the more active side. If you look at pelicans as being some are administrative and some are doers, I've fallen far more into the doer side than the administrative side. I've been KM for half of another person's KM ship. Sorry. I've been pretty much every level of marshal you can be. I've done a variety of events. I've auto-credited events. I've had some things that weren't events when I felt like we weren't doing enough. I had a pseudo event I used to do called Fighters Retreat, where I would just get a school gym in the middle of winter and invite people to come fight because it's cold here and people don't go outside. So we would just make a fighting thing happen because events were scarce in winter. And just kind of push for more things like that. I'm a big fan of not everything has to be Pinzig. Not every event has to have every possible option. I'm a fan of making events that are focused, whether they're ANS, dancing, bardic, fighting, rapier, archery. Those are all great. And if somebody wants to do a different thing at it and there's room and they're willing to run it, that's great too. And that's good for them on the service side. So I try to encourage people to go after their geek, for less of a better term, but also to take a turn taking the hits from being, different types of either autocrats, marshals in charge, group marshals, things like that.
My sister just commented that you're my twin. Like, because the way you described your services, I'm not a marshal, but I'm a doer. And I do a lot of the same things that you're talking about. So I think that's funny. He's your twin. I'm like, okay. All right.
So I have a question for you on that then. Okay. So do you find that, like in fighting, you can usually tell the sides of people amongst the knights? Like they tend to break up into 2 or 3 different viewpoints, or not even cliques exactly, just kind of the culture.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you find the same thing amongst pelicans with the doer side versus the administrative side? Because my experience, especially here, is that there's a very large valley between those two groups of people pretty often.
I do, I've never, I'll just be really honest. I've never felt real comfortable with my pelican because I felt like I was just doing things I was passionate about and that I wanted to happen and that I thought needed to happen. And I'm just not very comfortable with my pelican. So I don't consider myself a very good pelican. So it's hard for me to tell you that because I don't spend a lot of time hanging out in Pelican Council, to be honest.
And to be fair, and this will probably make your sister happy, I don't go to Pelican meetings very often. Okay. To the point where when I do, people are like, why is he here? What's going on?
Right.
So, but I find it frustrating to listen to the people complain about the service of other people when they're doing a good job and they nitpick it. Oddly, in fighting, I don't have that problem, but with service, it really annoys me. Yeah. And I have a similar feel because I was just doing the things I was doing. I did a put up or shut up moment on the KM side. Our KM was having some problems. There were some issues. I complained about it viscerally and told the crown, and it's like, well, you willing to take it if we replace him? I'm like, sure, I'll do it. I'll put up with that. It's, if I'm going to complain, the least I can do is put in a solution. And that's kind of how that worked out. I think it's important that people do work. Obviously, we're a volunteer organization. You can't get anywhere without that. Sometimes the breakdown on which work is important and which work isn't is a mistake. All work's important. It all needs to be looked at as being service to the community one way or another, or something doesn't happen. And I get where you feel like it's a false thing, but I can tell you, barely knowing you, you're totally fine. You are 100% a fine pelican. The amount of effort you've put into even just this video series that you've done and the amount of good it's done across the society very clearly shows that. So you should take some pride in that and understand that your crown was well justified in making you a pelican.
I am going to look at you and say thank you, and my sister's going to be like, "Good, Misty, that's what you do." So I'm not very good at compliments either, but let's look at your
Neither am
kettle
I.
too.
I'm horrible at it. I tend to, deflect or
Yes, me
find
too.
something else.
All right. What do you got there?
Oh, this is my county.
Okay.
I don't keep any of the regalia for
Okay.
Royal Pier. I don't like them. I know other people wear them and they have a reason. I've always felt like they're more divisive than inclusive, but this has the county scroll on the blade, and the
Oh,
whole thing
cool.
is just the county. And, it's a glaive. So
Very
kind of,
cool.
it's just unique. And that was some very nice people made that for me back in my first train. So,
I love useful object scrolls. They're the best.
mhm. Yep. It just felt like nobody ever gets to see it. So I was like, ooh, I can show it off a little bit.
All right. Are you ready for the final 10?
Sure.
All right. What event have you never gone to that you would like to go to?
Oh, that's easy. And you hear this all the time. Sport of Kings.
Okay. If we are having, we're planning on having Sport of Kings next summer.
Mhm.
I know that it's very close to Pinzig for people like you that are close to Pinzig. But if you come, we will put you up and we will feed you and take care of you. And I would love for you to teach polearm.
I would be
I'm just
happy on all
putting it out
counts.
there.
Yep. So assuming that when they crack me open, that all goes well, then, and in the sense I mean I don't croak it,
Right.
then yeah, I'd be happy to come out
It's
because
not
I can
even
still
say that.
teach. Yeah, I'm a realist on it. It doesn't bother me. It's kind of the face the demon in the room and it won't get you. So I just try to be aware of it and not worry about it from there. But and humor is my way of making light of it too.
Okay.
But I can teach regardless if I'm an armor or not. So that if you really want that, I'll come out for it because
Cool.
I kind of thought about it anyway. It was just a matter of lining up vacation and money and everything else. So yeah, I would love to get out there.
All right, cool. I'm gonna follow up with you because I am a planner and I'm not an administrative pelican, but I am very good at following up. So all right. So if you could fight anyone in the world, who would it be?
I would love to fight Avalok at his prime. I'm sure he's still plenty good now, but there's just nothing like seeing someone in their prime. So that would be amazing because it's just like I was saying earlier, it's something I've always wanted to see. I've always heard how he did so much with polearm for such a long time, and it's just I just wanted to see it.
Yeah.
And experience it, obviously.
He both my sister and I, he put us in armor. He's the guy that put us in armor. So
cool.
Yeah. What is your favorite Pinzig story?
That's tricky. I've been to 19 Pinzigs, so I've got a really good fighting one and a really good not fighting one, I think. So do you want both or just one?
Whatever you want to give.
All right. So fighting one, during Felix and Madalena's first reign, Madalena got authorized, got out fighting, and wanted to lead on the field with the troops, which is fantastic. And I'm a big fan if that's something you actually want to do. If it's a queen that isn't a fighter that feels like they have to, I don't necessarily think that's great. But if they really, really want to get out there and they put in the time to learn, that's fantastic. Because I don't want them to get hurt, obviously.
Right.
And a lot of troops end up having to defend them. So you want to be careful. So Felix's plan was he had two groups of people doing the guard for her. They had a formal guard, which was one of our pretty households, who I'm drawing a blank on the name, and they'll probably be very angry maybe about that. But they were fantastic. They followed her everywhere. They did all the pomp and circumstance, and they were plenty good fighters. And then there was a goon squad. That was me, Morgan Olander, and a couple other people. That our goal was basically that if, like, say, the two Chucks decided they were going to run over the queen, the queen's champion would get her off the field. The first guard was to try to stop them. And then our job was to make sure we beat the ever-loving snot out of them so she had time to get off the field, no matter how badly we got beat. So that was a very interesting Pinzig. So I have a couple of chipped teeth from that particular Pinzig. Yeah, a couple hard spear thrusts to the face from the Chucks.
Wow. Okay.
But that was fun. I mean, in its own way, nobody got really hurt or anything. I mean, even the chipped teeth was mostly an accident. But and then the non-fighting one was, we used to go out and drink at all hours, like everybody, right? Well, Victoria's boyfriend, then eventually husband, didn't go out and drink. My wife doesn't go to events. So I would escort her around as her basically stand-in boyfriend kind of thing. If somebody was bothering her too much, she'd walk up and I'd tell them to go away and use my most, you need to get the hell out of here, buddy, kind of look. So that was most of my job. So I would follow her around. She'd social butterfly everywhere because she's wonderful, and I would grimace at people. But we would drink a bunch and we'd share like whose night was it to get drunk. So one night it was my turn to get drunk, but I got really, really drunk. So I had a hard time walking. So she had basically attached to my belt and was trying to get me up the low road. And I would stagger away and she weighed half what I do. So we'd end up running into this ditch and we'd run into that ditch. And I know you're far out there, but have you been to Pinzig very much?
I've been once.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Swedish House of Pancakes?
No.
All right. So there's a group back there that I'm not sure they still do it, but they used to do a thing where they would have kind of their version of a camp IHOP, and they would call themselves the Swedish House of Pancakes. And if you showed up, they'd feed you pancakes, sausage, bacon, eggs. So she dragged me in there and was basically trying to wake me up by feeding me bacon and sausage for like 20 minutes to try to sober me up so we could make it the next quarter mile back to the Serengeti. That was a long evening. It was a lot of effort trying to drag me a quarter mile.
Are you still friends?
Well, we would be, except she's the one that passed away.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Which is okay. It's hard to remember all the details on everything, so I get it. But yeah, no, she was a wonderful person.
Cool. All right. Who are your favorite people to watch fight?
God, there's so many. Tactically speaking, I'd have to put Brannis on there, and not probably for the things that most of your viewers are thinking. I'm doing it for the mental side of what he's doing. I love seeing how he does his applying of pressure and how he uses the mental games to beat people. And he kills people before he does anything. And it took me a while to figure out how to do that myself and how to kill people of reputation, which I didn't think was a thing, honestly, until one day I went, oh, no, it really is a thing. I'm killing these guys because they're afraid of me. Not because I'm going to hurt them, but because they don't think they can beat me.
Right.
And I remember him saying that a long time ago, and that was a little bit of an aha moment. So watching him go through his processes and how he applies not just the physical tactics, but the mental and the spiritual tactics of fighting is super impressive. And they've done it at such a high level for such a long period of time. Just absolutely amazing. From a purely physical fighting standpoint, that's tricky. I've seen some people have some good fights. Morgan Olander at his prime, partly because he has a wonky double jointed elbow and he's a giant mountain. But he had some years where he was just super impressive to watch. And not that he doesn't have some of the other things. He knows how to fight at a high level in every area, and nothing there. But his physical skills when he was at his peak, they're impressive. There's a number of other people there too. I mean, I could probably spend an hour just going this person for this reason, that person for that reason. But yeah, for two quick ones, that's probably for those two facets anyway.
Very cool. Do you have a mentor or a hero in the SCA, and if so, who is it?
Again, this one's going to be many faceted. The number one person would be Victoria, who passed. Anything not related to fighting, absolutely, positively, totally my inspiration and hero. The fighting wise, so many people either gave me a tidbit that stuck and really was fundamental to me, or just did wonderful things. Probably I'd have to say Duke Felix, if I had to boil it down to one person. But on that same token, Duke Eli would have to fit in there too. And the reason for that is, so this might not be as favorable as I wish it to be. So I'm going to caveat it with, I think he's a wonderful human being and he fights amazingly well. But he had to relearn his style from my perspective, and I could be wrong here, but I believe this is what happened. When I first started in the SCA, he had an older fighting style that he was highly, highly competent with. But like some of the older styles, like side mount strapped rounds, people don't use them anymore, partly because they're just antiquated styles that get beat badly by modern fighting. And some of the other styles just don't work anymore. And so people had to evolve. When you've been amazingly good at a style for a long period of time and you're past your prime physically and you're starting to fight that inevitable loss of a step or a little bit of speed, and yeah, you've got all the skill, but it takes time, and then your skill starts to leave you because it's been replaced with a new set that's just super effective against what you're doing. He went through and, from my viewpoint, relearned at expense to his own getting beat, his ego, which we all have egos, you got to suck those up obviously, and taking all that time to learn another style, not just to be competent, but to be highly competitive again at a fairly high level. And that's just not something people do very often. And so it was highly inspirational to me, not just because, wow, look at that guy do that amazing thing, but as I started to age, I went from being a very run around, even in tight circles, run around guy to I'm not going to move my feet and I'm still going to kill you. I'm just going to let you run at me. So I had to relearn how to fight more efficiently without moving very much. And that thought has always been in my head on how to adjust my fighting style so I can fight as I age, as I'm no longer able to move when I'm not 130 pounds and I'm 260, you know, those kind of things.
It is quite impressive when people take a huge step back to take the step forward because fighting has progressed beyond what their technique is or whatever, or they've taken a huge amount of time off. Especially dukes that come back and get beat quite a bit, and they just stick with it, and they don't let their ego override it. All right. If you had to recommend one event in your kingdom for someone out of kingdom to go to, what would it be?
Well, our biggest event is a camping event called Warrior and Warlords. It's a nice event. It's a baronial border war, effectively, but it's the biggest one. The one I enjoy the most is Northern Realms War between us and the Outlands. Now, the trick is it's basically way out in the far southwest of the kingdom. So you can see Mount Rushmore. That's only like 30 minutes away from it, but very pretty. The Badlands is a very pretty area. The Outlands usually shows up a good number of people. We always have a good number of people. It's a good fun time. It's not giant. It's about 150 on a normal year, up to 300 on a really good year. But the fighting's solid. There's usually a good number of nights. Good mix, really. And it's a great event.
Cool. What book do you think everyone on the path to knighthood should read?
Matthew Descharnys' Book of Chivalry. But because that's not overly accessible, like if you want to read the stereo instructions of 14th century chivalry, that's one for you. It does have a lot of good things. You can kind of boil it down to he who does more is worth more. And there's like 40 pages of the guy that goes here and fights is worth more than the guy that goes here and fights, or the guy that doesn't go anywhere, or this guy. And so a lot of that. But it is a very excellent book for the mindset of a 14th century chivalry. From the standpoint of an SCA person that often gets inspiration across more than just I want to read this period thing, Sir Nigel and the White Company, which I know people have brought up a ton, but it's really just a fantastic set of information done in a style that gives you a lot of feel for what they were doing. So yeah, and then in SCA, and I know Braun has brought this up, but Vitus's works. No one ever does the Vitus voice. You should get Morgan to do the Vitus voice. He does a good angry Vitus.
There's a Vitus voice. Maybe I could get Kith to do it.
Probably. Actually, Kith would know exactly how to do it. Vitus is not a happy-go-lucky guy. If you ever see him smiling, it's a lie.
He is very upfront about that. I've never met him in person, but yes.
Yep, I think he's a great guy, by the way. Even if he is kind of angry all the time, I can commiserate.
If you could change one thing about the SCA, what would it be?
I would go back and change the award structure for the peerages, make everybody a knight, and just diversify it across those, because that's caused us way too much pain and angst when it's totally unnecessary.
Agree.
My peerage doesn't reflect your peerage. It doesn't reflect anyone's peerage. Everybody has their own path, their own method, their one way to getting there, their own journey. why should I care as long as they are doing the requirements and being a peer? So I know it won't be popular, but if you just made everybody order the chivalry for arts or order chivalry for fencing or heavy or whatever, archery, you eliminate an awful lot of the problems that we seem to run across when it comes to how do we recognize these people with peerages? Do we make a new omnibus? Do we make a new mod? And the amount of anger and useless banter those have caused, I think, would be going away.
Good one. What is your favorite in-kingdom tradition?
My favorite tradition from the mid-realm, even though I'm not a mid-realmer anymore, is the chivalry horn, drinking it and going through it at Pinzig. Very emotional, very connection, very much what I get out of a group. I miss that. They are wonderful about including us out of Kingdom guys when we show up at Pinzig. They'll include us, which is great. But I do miss that one. In my kingdom, I think the fact that we're, and I don't know if I'd call this so much a tradition or a thing as much as culture, but we're pretty traditionally hardcore independent. We actively try to stomp out peer fear as best we can, almost religiously, because it does a lot of damage too. And having people that are strong-willed, although it can be tricky sometimes in conversations, it does lend for a culture of a very strong group of people. And Northshield, partly because of who we are normally with the cold and living up here, but the kingdom's pretty tight knit in a lot of ways.
I have to say, from the outside looking in, it's really impressive at how open you guys are about dealing with your issues, and just how upfront you are about things. I mean, you guys discuss things on an open, like, public level that I don't think our kingdom ever would. So that's super impressive, and it's something that I really admire about you guys.
I'd much prefer someone come up to me and say, "Hey, you're being an asshole for reasons A, B, and C," and have that discussion than to demur it and oh, I can't go after that dude. He's too scary. What am I going to do? Am I going to take your birthday away from you? The worst you're going to get is harsh language out of me, and you can do the same thing back. And I'd rather have, even if I don't want to hear it, I'd rather have someone come up to me and say, "You're screwing up for these reasons. This is where you're not living up to your oath, or you're not living up to your thing," and have that discussion. And yeah, it's not a fun time, right? Nobody enjoys that. And you might not even acknowledge it in the moment, but those things seep in. And if it's effective to make people better, that's useful. I think that's a lot easier, honestly, to do from low to high than high to low. High to low runs into that crushing people of a word thing. That can be tricky. But I would prefer if people that aren't dukes and multi-peers and everything else should feel they should be able to come to us and say, "I think you're screwing up and here's why." Just bring it with evidence. Don't just come up to yell. Come up and say, "This is where you're falling short. Here's my example."
Well, and you guys have had some really difficult public conversations about some hard topics. So it's been very interesting from an outside perspective to watch, and it's admirable. So
I'm sure the kingdom would be pleased to hear that, because I know lots of good people doing their best.
what do you think is the most important trait to become a successful fighter?
Perseverance. You have to be, I know people that don't fight don't always understand. They just think we're out having fun. It's a glorious, wonderful time. But you have to set aside the time, the money, the effort. You have to be willing to put all that on and be hot, sweaty, uncomfortable, end up with every bump, bruise, cut, broken bone, messed up knees, tinnitus, maybe vision issues, maybe an occasional concussion, all that. And then you're spending immense amounts of money to do a thing that you get to fight for maybe an hour on a weekend, and all that training gets put on display in that one moment. So if you aren't very good at keeping on top of that and very dedicated to it, then you don't last, because nobody likes getting hit. Nobody enjoys that. Well, okay, maybe somebody, but then they have a kink for it or something. But the average person certainly doesn't. They don't like being hit. They like hitting people. It's just like when you go to a batting cage. If you hit a good home run ball, that feels great. If you shank one or hit it on the half, it sucks. Well, winning and losing in the SCA is kind of the same way. And you don't have to win to feel good about a fight. It just makes it a little better. right? But if you have a great fight, my favorite fights and people I've recommended to be knights have often been on fights they've lost, but they gave me such an amazing fight with so much depth to their game. You can see so much out of that. And the fights that I think about and help me the most are usually the ones where people beat me. I don't get a lot out of the fight where I walk out and one shot somebody.
Right.
But if somebody's giving me one heck of a fight and beats me with it, I get a lot out of that. And it's done more for me.
I love that you said that you're more impressed by how the person fights than whether they win and like what they're bringing to the field. Because I've always tried to emphasize that to people, that it's really not about your win and loss record. Like that's not what's going to get united. It's about the skill that you're showing, and you can lose every fight and have amazing skill and still get knighted. It's not about having to go to 7th round and crown or whatever.
Right.
So
I would say that things like crown should never be counted.
well, we have a very different culture than you, but our crowns are often over 100 people. So we can talk about that sometime, like different. But it's very different here than there. And there's really not a lot of chance that somebody who isn't ready to reign is going to reign, because we have such a deep list. But I love the inner kingdom cultural differences. I think they're amazing to discuss. So anyway. Thank you, Your Grace, so much for talking to me. My sister's right. Like I'm talking to her. We have like so many of the same sort of thoughts and positions. It's kind of scary. But I really enjoyed talking to you and meeting you. And I look forward to talking to you again. And hopefully we can make Sport of Kings work. I would love that. So,
that'd be great.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. On Wednesday, my sister and I are going to talk to Duke Floki from Artemisia. He's a really interesting guy. He's very cerebral, and he's just very, very thoughtful about training and fighting and all his other stuff. So that should be fun. So join us then. Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.